today I'm going to talk to you about teaching about money. Okay, my presentation today is called 10 Years of Teaching Money, Reflections on a Decade of Change. And as Juan Ignacio said, I am a law professor. And I actually joined the Academy back in the fall of 2012. And at that time, my research interest was what money is, who gets to make it, why does it work, what does law have to do with it? And I have to say that I'm extremely grateful to St. Mary's University where I teach, because when I was asked to design a writing and research seminar, my first year of teaching, I came up with something called Law of Money. And no one had any idea what that was going to be about. And I didn't really either have any idea what it was going to be about, except for I thought that these questions were important and needed some attention, that something was going on. And today I'm going to kind of take you through some of what I would consider the key events over the last, this is completing my 10th year of teaching. So over the last decade of observing the world of money and everything that's been going on, and then offer some reflections and some takeaways on that time. I know that today's conference is focusing on central bank digital currencies. So I hope that this will get some ideas flowing and be a bit of a, kind of setting the table for some of the in-depth great presentations that you're going to hear today. So this is kind of what it was like at the beginning of teaching the law of money. I felt really alone. Not many people were thinking about this field. Back in 2012, Bitcoin was new on the scene and money felt pretty stable. We had, of course, just come out of the global financial crisis, but people were not, I think, really perceiving that we were going to be seeing massive changes in what money is, who gets to make money, and how it works. So it felt a bit, lonely in those days. And I would contrast the feeling of that moment to this is what I kind of see it as now. There are so many papers being written about what money is, who gets to make money, what central banks are doing about central bank digital currencies, all the risks and the benefits, what are the possibilities of redesigning these things? Are we going to have Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies offered as legal tender in different countries around the world? How can cryptocurrencies meaningfully coexist with central bank digital currencies? So it's very crowded now, and I think that's kind of cool. I am not the only person teaching in this area anymore. Over the years, I've gotten to know many scholars who are researching and teaching in this area, have met a number of them at UCL, presenting at various things. Rowan Gray is a scholar in the US who is teaching about these things. Christine Desan is at Harvard Law School teaching about these things. There's more and more courses I know in the US being designed about this. I recently participated in the winter school at the University of Siena, where they have a really cool interdisciplinary study of European monetary law. So there is great excitement and interest in this field. So it's very exciting to watch something that you're interested in go from kind of out in the boonies, maybe like the scene behind me, to totally mainstream with lots of people interested in sharing ideas. Okay, so today, as I said, in this presentation, I want to kind of reminisce and look back at key events that have happened in the area of money since 2012 or so. Really, maybe I'll sneak back to 2009 when Bitcoin was launched. And then, as I said, reflect on this. Okay, so as I said, back in 2012, in designing my course for the law of money, I had to somewhat explain it to the people who, to my faculty members at the school. What is this course that you're going to be teaching? What kind of things could you possibly cover? Are there any readings? Why should people learn about this? And I'm going to show you in a second the kind of course description that I came up with for this, but I'll give you some foreshadowing. Finding readings was hard. Finding readings was hard. In my first teaching about Bitcoin in the spring of 2013, there was a report from the European Union on it, but that's about all that there was. The US hadn't released too much stuff yet. People were just beginning to think about it. There was one law review article by Ruben Grinberg, who was a Yale law student when he wrote it, that kind of gave the lay of the land of Bitcoin, and was actually, I think, extremely prescient and astute and very measured in his analysis of the topic, pointing out potential risks and benefits, but there was very little. There certainly were not textbooks or case books, what we use in law schools, that would easily lend themselves to this course. This was try and think about topics that could be relevant and interesting and find readings from them from whatever source. So the syllabus consisted of lots of news articles, probably some, social media kind of Reddit posts and Bitcoin talk forums, those types of things, some commentary from random central bankers, and really just the early thinkers who were trying to find each other in this world, and the collaborations hadn't necessarily started yet, right? People were kind of isolated and just beginning to find each other. And I had to tell people why I thought this mattered enough to have a course about. Not too many students thought that it was that relevant. I have to say, I looked back at my records and I think 6 students signed up for the first iteration of the course. So they were brave. And I am grateful to them for taking a chance on this topic. Why did this matter? Well, I was convinced after watching what had happened in the global financial crisis, and kind of experiencing the loss of trust and the shifts in exchange rates and the serious actions that were required by governments, that something was going to be happening with money, and particularly when Bitcoin came on the scene. I began to do readings about the history of money changes, particularly in the US, and came up with, oh my gosh, there are some very important Supreme Court cases in the US that emerged from significant changes in what money was. So those kinds of things came into my curriculum, such as the legal tender cases in the US, which grew out of the introduction of greenbacks, paper money, during the American Civil War, a time of great crisis. We also read the gold clause cases, which emerged from the Great Depression, when in order to save the economy, one of the things that FDR did in the US was to confiscate everybody's gold, for one, but also invalidate every single clause in a contract that was called a gold clause, that said that people could choose to be paid in the value of gold rather than in just US dollars. So really critical moments in monetary history, I learned, had come about in moments of crisis in the US. And I began to wonder what implications that would have for, potential crises that seemed to be on the horizon and we were experiencing in our modern world. So here was our spring 2013 course description. I'm not going to make you read all of it. But you can see here, I was really focused on how definitions of money shift in times of crisis, as I said, such as the Civil War and the Great Depression in the U.S. And noting some significant events, right? New questions have been raised, posed through international conversations about the dollar's role as a global reserve currency, federal legislation about the dollar and the Federal Reserve. Ron Paul was very much on the scene. For those of you not from the US, Ron Paul was very much an advocate for returning to the gold standard and actually ending the Fed. And I actually spent a number of months trying to figure out if we could get Ron Paul to come speak to my class, but it wasn't big enough and we couldn't afford his fee. State initiatives to adopt alternative currencies to the US dollar. This was a weird thing that was happening back in 2012, 2013, where a whole bunch of US states actually adopted gold as a way to pay taxes in their states. And it was called the Constitutional Tender Act. States were trying to figure out any way that they could compete with the US government in issuing or adopting alternative forms of currency. And in 2012, in the US, the Republican Party actually had as part of their platform that they wanted to investigate a return to the gold standard. Things were beginning to be in flux. Okay, so fast forward to the course that I'm just finishing up now, our fall 2021 course description. And again, I'm not going to make you read all of this, but one thing to notice, it's a longer course description. Lots of things have happened and lots of current events and changes have meant that there is much more to examine. Okay, the core question in the course is, what is money and who gets to control it? And this manifests through all the debates that we're witnessing today. We have Bitcoin millionaires, multimillionaires, some of them billionaires, right? Central bank digital currencies, Facebook's proposed Libra DM currency. We're watching the form and control of money change before our eyes. And this has gone from backwoods to, again, a priority of central bankers and regulators around the world. New questions have been raised about our existing definitions of money, right? We're watching Bitcoin and Ethereum and thousands of other cryptocurrencies being used and traded every day. We've seen debates about the viability of the euro, right? Greece thought about leaving the euro. Joseph Stiglitz wrote a book about what was wrong with the euro in the last 10 years, I think 2016. Speculation about central banks issuing digital currencies and proposals by companies like Facebook to issue their own. Okay, so basically my message is we've kind of come a long way and there is much to study and learn about here. Okay, so this is the part where I want to talk about some of what I see as the important events that have happened along the way. I am not claiming that in this presentation that these events were causes of any particular later events. I am claiming, though, that they were significant. This is, as you've noticed, a kind of anecdotal type presentation about experiences over the last 10 years. And from my perspective, when I was reflecting over this and looking back at things that I'd learned and talked about with my students and how their perspectives and mine had shifted, these were some of the key moments that that came to the fore. Okay, so let's talk about a few of them. So first of all, January 2009, Bitcoin launched. Of course, nobody really, except for very few software developers, noticed this at the time. But I really think that this was kind of an extremely key moment in developments about money and the beginning of our questioning the very fundamentals of what money is. It certainly had that impact for me. At the time, I was thinking probably that I was a commodity money type person. that the thing mattered. And I have to say that Bitcoin has made me re-examine that question completely, right? It makes us, it's this bizarre middle ground where we see visually the record keeping system that money is, but also at the same time, there's a strong argument that Bitcoin is a thing that people are exchanging. And that's actually how in the US, the regulators have chosen to treat it as a commodity, as if it is a box, a thing. So Bitcoin really straddles that and makes us think hard about what money is. 2013, we had two really important events. There are more. And again, this timeline does not purport to be every event that is relevant to this conversation, just a few that stick out. We had a banking crisis in Cyprus. And this, I think, was a moment when people noticed for the first time that Bitcoin could be something that people would turn to when they felt that there was a crisis in their own location. Okay. In March of 2013, I looked back, and on March 16th, the middle of the month, Bitcoin traded at $47. Right? Doesn't that seem quaint now? Later that month, as the crisis intensified, Bitcoin's price went up 87%, and it traded at $88 per Bitcoin. And this was discussed and explained that a lot of the people in Cyprus were using this kind of as a safe haven and a way to get their money out of the country when, there may be capital controls imposed, or the state is trying to limit people's ability to get their money out of the system. Is Bitcoin an escape route? There was also a big event in the Edward Snowden revelations. Lots of information was revealed about the NSA in the US, basically, looking at a lot of people's emails and cell phones and doing a lot of tracking that people didn't know about. And I think this was also a significant event because it kind of was part of what I would consider to be, a deep loss of trust in our basic institutions, our state institutions, our financial institutions, that has accelerated over this last 10 years. In October 2014, I looked back, J.P. Koning, one of the important commentators on money, who I discovered over this decade, wrote a post about FedCoin and what that could be. And as far as I can tell, that was really, one of the first introductions or imaginations of what is part of our lingo now as central bank digital currencies. And I know that David Enolfato is going to be here later today on a panel. And of course, he was one of the very first also to kind of explore this topic, but it didn't really pick up steam. Here we are now in the late 2021. And it's only in the past several years that this has really picked up steam, but it came out right back in 2014. June 2016 was the Brexit vote. Okay, this was a shock to many people that England was going to, or the UK was going to leave the EU. And again, it kind of was a marker in this splintering of traditional institutions, and a sign of kind of social instability. And that is now continued to play out, right? I'm speaking to you in London, but you're not part of the EU anymore. Big change. Okay, June 2019, Facebook came out with their Libra proposal, a global currency. So this was kind of another shot over the bow, and someone else taking a stake in who gets to make money. It's not just going to be governments. It's not just going to be these kind of amorphous non-government actors like with cryptocurrencies. We have companies now stepping up to the table and saying, we want to do a global currency. And of course, this received tons of pushback from governments and regulators. And Facebook has dramatically scaled back its ambitions for Libra, now called Diem, but another player in the fight. Early 2020, the COVID pandemic began. I mentioned this because we saw shifts in what money, feelings about money. Remember the panic about the germs that were on cash, and a really an acceleration to using purely digital forms of forms of payments, forms of money for our transactions. This also coincided with an even greater loss of trust in our institutions, and splintering of, of society into polarized groups. I'm of course speaking, I'm sure, from a US perspective, but that's very much the feeling in the US. Like, we're not really necessarily a very united states of America at the moment. And then finally, in September 2021, we saw El Salvador make Bitcoin a legal tender. This would have been unheard of when I taught the course in 2013. And El Salvador is not the only country considering this, right? There's rumors of other countries considering it. And my students, I have to say, are extremely interested in this. And I want to now, after kind of getting you thinking about a bunch of different kind of important events, just reflect on a few things. Okay, so what can we take away from this journey through time? I think the fight over who gets to control money and how different monies might coexist with one another is ever more explicit. We were able to, or central banks were, I think, able to kind of push Bitcoin to the side and say it's not significant, it doesn't meet our standard definition of money. We can kind of, not worry about it until it gets big. It's big now. Crypto is big now. Cryptocurrencies may very well pose threats to the sovereignty of to sovereignty itself of these different countries and also their currencies. We also, as I said, have big companies, big players in tech who may be putting stakes in the ground to have a piece of this. So central bank currencies are not the only game in town. And I think part of the rush to create central bank digital currencies is to stay in the fight. Very much a tension here between global and local, right? We have thousands, as I said, of different cryptocurrencies, and we have ambitions by Facebook to do their global currency. We also saw a proposal from Bank of England, Governor Mark Carney, for a global currency. So we can't seem to figure out whether we think we need to be small and just community-based, or whether we need something for the entire world. And so I think this question is going to kind of remain. We've also learned, I think, over the last 10 years, cash is very special. Cash, there's been a huge debate, and one of the units in the course this year actually was the war on cash. We've had to reflect on what cash offers: privacy, peer-to-peer transactions. Of course, plenty say that this facilitates crime, but it also includes everyone. Everyone who may not have a cell phone can still participate in a cash economy. So there's been a big fight over whether we should be pushing to get rid of cash due to its reduced usage, or keeping it as a possibility. And cash is actually, I see the attributes of cash and what we've come to value about it are driving the conversation around central bank digital currencies and privacy. We've had to think about privacy and whether it matters or not. And again, as I said, want to move on here, but that is one of the key points in the conversation about central bank digital currencies. I can tell you that my students would say that they are afraid of having central banks see everything that they do. There's very much a feeling of this government panopticon being the problem. I think we've seen that trust can shift radically in a relatively short period of time. As I said at the beginning when I was teaching this course, no one would have imagined Bitcoin as legal tender. No one would have thought of trusting it, especially over government issued currencies like the US dollar or the British pound or the euro. But I'm telling you, in my students' presentations this fall that I just sat through, their paper presentations, it was something that was just totally clear to them that, you know, if something doesn't work out with the US dollar or the central bank digital currencies, they should just adopt Bitcoin, right? Central banks should just adopt Bitcoin. And that there's fundamental trust now in cryptocurrencies that seems to have been perhaps, you know, if we think that there's a fundamental amount of trust in the world, well, trust that was devoted to governments, central banks and stuff, maybe that has shifted to cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies can be politically popular. Certainly in the US, it's become trendy for some politicians to, you know, court the crypto constituency. Ted Cruz from my state of Texas, Cynthia Lummis, a senator from Wyoming. This is a big constituency and they have a lot of money and politicians are taking notice. And again, my state seems to be playing an important role here. We are actually begging Bitcoin miners to come and locate in our state. One lesson I've taken from this is that money uncertainty about who gets to make it, what it is, what the value is, kind of is tied to this social instability. All of the things that we've been watching in our political world I think, are manifesting in our uncertainty about money. And as we've seen historically, change in money has come in times of crisis. And I think we're in a time of crisis. I really do. With the great fall in trust in institutions, with our polarization, with the pandemic, I think we are seeing and will see continued changes in money. Finally, I'm from law. Many of you are from different fields, from economics to computer science to sociology, etc. This is a great part of the UCL Center for Blockchain Technologies in that it brings these multiple disciplines together. That is 100% essential if we're going to understand and develop our knowledge about this topic further. We can't just, no offense to the economists, leave money to the economists, right? The standard definition of money, you know, is 3 characteristics: store of value, medium of exchange, unit of account. That's not enough. That's not the full story. We need to be bringing all these disciplines to the table. And I hope that we will see fields of study, degrees or certificate programs devoted to the study of money. And finally, I'll wrap up by saying we still don't agree on what money is. Even after thinking about this for years and years and years, when I talk about these topics with my students, I'm kind of persuaded by each one of the different frameworks, the lenses that we use on money. And it's amazing to me that I can still be somewhat persuaded by each of them. I think they each have something to tell us. So I don't know that we're ever going to get to the bottom of this question, but it's sure fun to try. So here is to the next 10 years of developments in money. And I look forward to learning from the rest of you today as you tell me what they're going to be. Thank you.